Despite Warhammer 40k's massive popularity, somehow Games Workshop still hasn't given the fans a proper Warhammer movie or TV show. We've gotten a couple of small budget releases on Warhammer Plus, but that doesn't really count. How are you gonna call episode 3 of the Exodite a season finale? Games Workshop, my dude, you made an episode, not a season. And as its fans are well aware, 40k is pretty dark and would make the perfect setting for a horror movie. But given Games Workshop's current MO, it's probably never gonna happen. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't movies out there that, with a little bit of retooling in the script and maybe a costume change or two, could effectively be called a Warhammer movie. Event Horizon is the classic example. What with 40k fans having spent years coming up with fan theory after fan theory on why it definitely takes place in the Warhammer universe. But there are a bunch of other movies that capture the essence of the Grimdark incredibly well. From Starship Troopers' bloody gory bug battles and biting social commentary, to Annihilation's depiction of a landscape being twisted and corrupted by forces beyond our comprehension. All of the films we're going to be discussing today will definitely scratch the itch if, like me, you're tired of waiting on GW to give us a proper 40k film. Oh yeah, and if you like content like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell to be notified when I post a new video. So with all that out of the way, let's dive into 5 movies that, for all intents and purposes, feel a lot like a 40k movie.
Starship Troopers.
It's not really fair to call Starship Troopers a horror movie, because it's definitely not, even though it has an absolutely obscene amount of blood and gore. But after you've watched it and you stop to think about the film's implications, it has some massive grimdark undertones. On its surface, it's a big dumb action movie that sees the forces of humanity fighting off against a group of alien bug monsters. But the film is actually a lot smarter than most people give it credit for, especially when it was originally released, as early reviews of the day didn't seem to pick up on the heavy use of satire to parody authoritarian regimes. There's a lot of similarities between the film and 40k. The first and most obvious being the monsters in the movie known as arachnids, bearing a striking resemblance to the Tyranids. They're both massive and brutal bug-like creatures that rip and tear their way through their enemies in the bloodiest, goriest way possible. They both utilize some pretty gnarly organic weaponry and employ very similar tactics, fighting with seemingly infinite numbers that throw themselves at the opposition in unending waves, grinding them down in a never-ending war of attrition, while the bigger and scarier bugs start showing up after the enemy has been significantly weakened. However, the more interesting parallel between this movie and 40k is that of the human forces themselves. Both the Imperium and the human civilization in Starship Troopers are bombarded with propaganda on a daily basis. They are taught not to question authority, even going as far as having military service be required for basic human rights. In the first half of the film, we get to see how this pseudo-Imperium views the war. That being a soldier is not only honorable, but one of the best things you can do with your life. We're shown scenes in schools where suspiciously beautiful students are taught that violence solves all problems, and that the enemy is nothing more than a grotesque monster that needs to be eradicated. However, as the film progresses, we get to see the reality of interplanetary war. And it turns out that being shipped off to a different planet to fight against giant bug monsters is a lot more terrifying than the fluffy propaganda pieces made it seem. This is pretty similar to the Imperium over in 40k, which is a brutal authoritarian regime. Being accepted into the Astra Militarum is put on a pedestal by humans on backwater worlds. It's a chance to go off into the stars, to see the galaxy, while fighting for your fellow man, defending the Imperium, and serving the God Emperor. Imperial soldiers are taught that dying in the Emperor's name is glorious, that it should be celebrated, and perhaps that brings some comfort to the estimated million guardsmen that are turned through the meat grinder and killed every single day in the grimdark future. If the fact that Starship Troopers is secretly a Warhammer movie wasn't clear enough, the humans in this universe have recently begun developing latent psychic abilities. Much like how at the end of the Dark Age of technology, psykers began being born much more regularly across the galaxy. I should point out that there is one major difference between humanity in both of these properties. In Starship Troopers, the humans are the aggressors. They were the first to launch an attack against the Arachnids' homeworld, which saw the bugs respond by launching asteroids at Earth. Now, this event served as a rallying cry for humanity to launch a full-scale invasion of their homeworld. So even though on the surface with this movie, where it seems like the humans are justified in their actions, the subtext of the film actually makes them out to be the villains. And there's a lot of very similar subtext around the Imperium over in 40k. except for when it comes to them versus the Tyranids specifically. The Tyranids are always the aggressors. There's no nuance with the space bugs. Every other faction in Warhammer, whether misguided or not, you could in good faith make the argument that their horrifying actions are justified. And this is especially true with the forces of mankind. The bugs are different. They're very straightforward. They show up on the planet and consume all life before moving on to do it again. I personally never read a story where the Imperium invaded a Tyranid world. If you're looking for a great movie that captures the feeling of what it's like to be a guardsman living in the Imperium, a cog in the Imperial war machine, and sent off to fight against an unknowable evil, then it's definitely worth a watch.
But before we dive a bit deeper, I want to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Established Titles. Established Titles is a company that gives you the unique opportunity to become a lord or a lady. They're based off of an old Scottish tradition where landowners were referred to as lords, ladies, or lairds. So the way it works is Established Titles will sell you at least 1 square foot of land in Edelston, Scotland. And by owning that plot of land, you're technically a lord or a lady. It's pretty simple, and the purchase goes to a really good cause, as Established Titles will plant 1 tree for every plot they sell. It's a really great way of helping out the environment, because Established Titles also works really closely with charities such as One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future, in order to preserve forests around the world. And since you're now officially a lord or a lady, you can add that title to pretty much anything, from plane tickets to credit cards. You can even put it on your dating profile if you want. They give you a really cool certificate like this one that details your exact plot number, and if you ever found yourself in Scotland and wanted to visit your land, you technically could. Established Titles has told me that the first 200 people that use my link will have their plot set up right next to mine, so we can build our own little Westhammer kingdom together. It makes a super unique last-minute gift for the holidays, and you can be happy with your purchase decision, knowing that a portion of the proceeds are going to a good cause. Established Titles is also running a huge Black Friday sale right now, and if you use the code WEST10, you'll get an additional 10% off your entire order. So don't wait around. Check out the link in the description of this video and become a lord or a lady today. Thanks again to Established Titles for sponsoring this video, and with that out of the way, let's get back into the grimdark.
Of all of the movies that have some kind of spiritual connection to Warhammer 40,000, none have inspired quite as many fan theories as Event Horizon. And for good reason, as the events the film depicts are eerily similar to what would happen in the grimdark future if one was to attempt to traverse the warp without the protective equipment known as Geller fields. The plot of the movie focuses around the titular Event Horizon, a spaceship that has been experimenting with ways of traveling faster than the speed of light. However, at one point near the edge of our solar system, the Event Horizon vanished without a trace. No one knew what happened to the ship or her crew until it suddenly reappeared without warning 7 years later, broadcasting a signal to a nearby planet that was basically just a garbled mess of inhuman screams. The crew of another vessel, the Lewis and Clark, alongside the Event Horizon's original designer, are dispatched to investigate the ship and learn what happened to it, as well as rescue any survivors, as surely someone had to send that super creepy distress signal. And it turns out that the Event Horizon had been successful in traveling faster than the speed of light. But the crew was messing with forces humanity was never meant to attempt to comprehend. They did this by using a device known as a gravity drive, a creation that could fold the fabric of space-time in order to make jumps anywhere in the galaxy. When the Event Horizon attempted this, it opened a portal to a parallel dimension. The movie doesn't give us a lot of specifics here, but it's as if they traveled through hell itself. And needless to say, it had some pretty disastrous ramifications on the ship and her crew. Saying that they went absolutely batshit crazy is a massive understatement, as our rescue team finds mounting evidence of hedonistic and satanic rituals. They also found evidence of what looked to be a murder orgy in some old video logs. It's pretty dark stuff, and apparently the release we got actually was heavily edited, with blurry images of some of the more gory scenes showing up on the internet from time to time. Now, even without these, the movie definitely has a very disturbing atmosphere that is eerily similar to what ships in 40k go through when they utilize warp travel. And if we go full fan theory mode here, we can see that the film is actually depicting humanity's early attempts at utilizing the warp to colonize the galaxy, a practice that was developed in the dark age of technology that had some pretty disastrous early results. Safe, and that's probably not the best word, as even today, traveling through the warp is never safe, but safer warp travel was eventually achieved through the use of Geller fields, a device that projected a bubble of physical reality around the ship. This keeps them protected as they traverse through the hostile and alien universe of the warp, something that the crew of the Event Horizon, as well as the early pioneers of mankind over in 40k, definitely should have had access to before attempting to jump through hell. I totally get why people call this movie a 40k movie. It's got a lot of similarities to some of the Imperium's early lore, and is probably the best depiction we have in media of the very specific example of a spaceship ripping a hole in reality in order to travel faster than the speed of light by taking a shortcut through hell, only to have its Geller fields either fail or not exist at all, resulting in disastrous and demonic consequences. Something that tends to happen almost every day in the grimdark future. Full disclosure, John Carpenter's The Thing is probably my favorite movie of all time, and it's one of those rare examples where the remake is infinitely better than the original source material. Not the 2011 version, that one doesn't count. The movie follows a group of researchers who are stationed on a base in the Antarctic. They end up getting picked off one by the movie's monster, a creature that long ago crash-landed in the frozen north and ended up getting trapped in the ice. The titular Thing is an ancient alien evil from outside the limits of human understanding. It's a shape-shifting apex predator, honed to the point of evolution perfection, and set loose to infiltrate new worlds and consume its population. The Thing itself has no discernible shape and can take any form that it pleases, derived from the myriad different species it has consumed. It's constantly changing and evolving in ever more fascinating and grotesque ways. It isn't bound by the laws of our world and can achieve perfect camouflage by disguising itself as not just grotesque monsters, but any living creature it has encountered. So not only is the Thing a rapidly changing abomination, but it also works to sow distrust and chaos in the minds of its victims by infiltrating their society and spreading paranoia until it reaches a boiling point, and brother and sister start to turn on one another, holding up a mirror and showing us that the real monsters were the friends we made along the way. Now this all sounds super familiar. Like, I know I've read this somewhere before. I just can't quite put my oh yeah, it's Tzeentch. It's a demon of Tzeentch. It's definitely Tzeentch. Or some type of Genestealer Tzeentch demon hybrid. That works too. Disappointingly, it's a pretty common sentiment amongst 40k fans on the internet that Tzeentch is by far the least scary of all of the Chaos Gods. And I would put forward that all of the people that think that are incredibly wrong. Tzeentch is absolutely horrifying, and the Thing is a really good example of what possession by one of his demons or an encounter with one of his blessed followers would actually be like. Slaanesh tries to turn you into a pervert, Nurgle gives you a case of the runs, and Khorne hits you in the face with a battle axe. Now all of these things are terrible, but Tzeentch gets inside your head. He subjects you to endless paranoia and madness, which is bad enough as it is, but when it comes to his creations, the entire point of never-ending change is that you are dealing with the unknown. There's no way to comprehend what a creation of Tzeentch even is, and he's basically a Lovecraftian elder god. And speaking of Lovecraft, he once said that the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. Something that I think Tzeentch and The Thing represent perfectly. I really don't want to spoil too much of this movie if you haven't seen it before, but in my opinion, it's a perfect horror movie. And I'll admit, I was one of those people that didn't think Tzeentch was that scary, until I made the connection between The Thing and the Master of Deception. That gave me a newfound respect for just how horrifying Tzeentch truly is. And The Thing only focuses on a single Tzeentchian entity, and not a full-scale demonic incursion, which would be far more horrifying. In fact, the next film we're going to talk about shows what happens when Tzeentch begins to corrupt an entire environment. The film Annihilation follows a group of scientists as they come face to face with the horrors of a mysterious expanding dimension known simply as Area X. This zone is characterized by an ominous shimmering wall of light that is rapidly expanding, and if left uncontained, threatens to consume the entire world. No one knows what's causing this phenomenon, or whether it's even dangerous or not. But previous attempts to infiltrate Area X have been unsuccessful, as none of the expedition teams who have ventured past its shimmering barrier have come back out alive. The protagonists of the film are another group who are being sent inside Area X in order to locate the missing teams and figure out exactly what is going on. And it turns out that everything in there is mutating and evolving at an accelerated rate in completely baffling directions. Alligators having teeth like a shark's, people transforming into plants. There's even a crazy bear monster that's able to mimic the screams of the victims it has killed in order to lure out their companions. Everything inside Area X has its DNA mutate and rapidly twist and change, creating ever more bizarre creatures. It's very reminiscent of what corruption from the Architect of Fate would actually look like, but in a much more grounded, scientific-y kind of way. When I watched this film, I imagined this is what the early days would look like if a change cult was able to pull off some grand ritual in the name of Tzeentch and began spreading his influence across the world. It's super trippy and bizarre, but admittedly, it's not for everyone. It's one of those movies that requires interpretation and discussion. It encourages its viewers to question what exactly is going on and come up with their own interpretations. It doesn't really leave you with a lot of concrete answers by the end of the film, which is something that many people rightfully can end up feeling frustrated by. But if you're somebody like me who likes when the movie doesn't spell everything out, it's a very enjoyable film. But honestly, at the end of the day, maybe they should have given us just a few answers, because I walked away from it thinking, yep, definitely a Warhammer movie. Which, upon retrospect, may not have actually been what the film was going for. 2016's The Void is a descent into insanity as the fabric of reality begins to crumble all around us. It gives us a glimpse into parallel universes and forces the human mind was never designed to comprehend, complete with some absolutely amazing practical effects that are a love letter to movies from the 80s. The film centers around a group of people trapped inside an abandoned hospital, who are being forced to stay inside by a mysterious cult that has them completely surrounded. If they try to leave, the cult will kill them. We see several members of the group succumb to a supernatural madness that forces them to mutilate their own bodies and kill each other in some pretty grotesque manners. Once these individuals are eventually killed, the horror starts to ramp up even further, as their bodies begin to mutate and become the vessels for some super disturbing supernatural entities. With no way out, several members of the group venture deeper into the hospital's lower levels, a labyrinth of twisting and changing corridors that never existed before this night. Now, the cult featured in the film is attempting to bridge the gap between our universe and a mysterious parallel universe known as the Void, which gives the same vibes as many a chaos cult over in 40k, as chaos cults will often wait in the shadows until their numbers reach their peak. They will then attempt to open a portal to the warp through sacrifice and sustained blasphemy, in order to usher forth a demonic incursion and offer their planet up as sacrifice to the dark gods. Honestly, all it would take to make this a proper Warhammer movie is to change up the scenery a little bit to include some of that gothic architecture that 40k is famous for, and maybe give the cast of characters more setting-appropriate costumes. Other than that, it's a pretty spot-on example of what a chaos cult is capable of. All that aside, if you're just a fan of practical effects and spooky monster movies, then this is definitely something worth watching. So there we go, those are 5 movies that are definitely about, or at least heavily inspired by Warhammer 40k. Now obviously the premise of this video is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but considering that Games Workshop for some reason still has failed to give the fans anything other than an underwhelming streaming service, these movies definitely help scratch that grimdark itch. What are some other movies that you think would make great 40k films with just a little bit of retooling? What would you want out of an actual official Warhammer movie? What would you want it to be about? And have you seen any of the movies on this list? What did you think of them? I look forward to reading all of your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks again to the amazing patrons that support the work that I do, and if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to like and subscribe, as well as ring the bell, as nowadays that's the actual subscribe button on YouTube. Thanks for hanging out with me today, my friends, and I will catch y'all in the next one.